This is our group, Josie, Kabir, Lizzie, and Griffin, and our project is on France and Algeria.
6.1 Rationales of Imperialism. Never has a colonial enterprise offered such great difficulties to a civilized people as our Algerian enterprise. Algeria is not a quasi-vacant land, as were originally Australia, Canada, New Zealand, and the United States. It cannot, therefore, like these latter countries, be simply a colony of population, serving as an outlet for the exuberance of the population of Europe. Algeria is not either a land where all the soil is occupied and cultivated by a dense population of gentle manners, like the Indies or the islands of Java, and cannot be, like the latter, a pure colony of exploitation. The colonization of Algeria is without precedent and without analogy in history or in present times. So the gist of this quote is that there was not a real reason for the imperialism of Algeria over a different country. It was just out of convenience that the France imperialized. France was looking to expand their economy, and they took over Algeria, which was right across the Mediterranean. 6.1 continued. It may be said, with truth, that tropical Africa is large enough not only for both nations, but for all the civilized powers who intend seriously to undertake the difficult task of developing it. Again, this is sort of saying that there was no reason for Algeria over other countries to be imperialized, but because of the use of civilized powers in this quote, we can see that it went into the white man's burden as well, because the civilized nations felt as though it was their duty to colonize and expand the economies of these African countries.
And then adding on to that, in a French pamphlet about their navy from 1844, they wrote, Algeria ought to secure us the first political and naval rank in the Mediterranean. Such is the object of our conquest. Our aim, which there is no necessity of concealing from Europe nor the Arabs, is the propagation of Christian civilization in Africa. So this kind of shows that France felt like they needed to colonize Algeria because they wanted to establish a more Christian society. And then 6.2, state expansion from 1750 to 1900. You want to do that?
Yes. So currently, this shows how over time France expands. So at this time in France, the leader of France is Louis XV, who is the head of the monarchy and the King of France. So currently, the French in 1750 have control of the North American and Guyana territories. In 1800, the leader of France is Napoleon Bonaparte. Guyana undergoes many different changes in their governmental systems, and the French begin to take control of Egypt and retain control of Haiti, though they have lost their North American colonies. In the 1850s, we can begin to see every 5 decades that now the French control Algeria. So first in 1827, due to the Day of Algeria hitting a French diplomat with a fly swatter, the French, in June of 1830, they invade the Algerian capital of Algiers. Eventually, they invade the rest of the nation, capturing the territory in 1834. After control was established, the armies brutalized the native population, looting the lands and harassing the people. It is estimated by 1875, 825,000 Algerians had been killed since the beginning of the conflict. After the French had established control over the nation, Algeria became a producer for cash crops for the French, including wheat, olives, tobacco, fruits, and vegetables. At this time, the French also were exerting control over Guyana as well as other African nations, including early settlements on West Africa and right under the Bight of Benin. At this time, France's leader is Napoleon III, nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1900, Algeria has been fully annexed into the French Empire. In 1892, the French created a legislative body for the Algerian territory called the French Senate. Most Algerians were not able to vote until after World War II. The French have also expanded their empire to Asia and expanded their West African colonies to include many more territories.
Okay, so 6.3, Indigenous responses to state expansion. From 1750 to 1900. So the main, rebellion of this time period was led by Emir Abdelkader, who was a military leader who led resistance leaders against the French. And then there's a painting of the French taking their encampment in 1843, and that is shown on the screen. And he managed to push French forces back to a few ports by harassing and negotiating with them. But eventually he was defeated by French's larger army. He represents part of the Algerian resistance against the French and was famous for his humane way of fighting. This is demonstrated through this quote where he says, "Take a thorn bush and sprinkle it for a whole year with water. It will yield nothing but thorns. Take a date tree and leave it without culture, and it will produce dates." And so this is like him saying that evil cannot be fixed, and it will create more evil with good treatment, and good will flourish no matter what, I guess. And his resistance fighting was dependent on a common Muslim identity, and he didn't want to kill unless he had to. As indicated by the quote, he likely felt the need to suppress the French in order to have the common good for Algerians.
6.4 Global Economic Development from 1750 to 1900. In 1830, France took over Algeria. From 1830 to 1860, French Algerians attempted to make wine, but the climate was too warm and the wine would go bad. The French were dependent on wine, however, because it was considered to be the safest drink and cured people from epidemics. Beginning in 1863, the phylloxera outbreak infected 1/3 of vineyards in France, so they were forced to turn to Algeria. The technological inventions allowed for cold fermentation, which resulted in the ability to ferment wine in hot climates. 50,000 families immigrated from France to Algeria, taking over 700,000 hectares of land. Algeria produced 1.2 million hectoliters of wine from 1865 to 1869, and this number rose to 10.6 million hectoliters from 1875 to 1879. Algeria became the largest exporter and fourth largest producer of wine in the world. This disrupted the global economy, however. Spain and Italy had formerly been primary producers of wine in the region, and Algeria took over this role, and both countries needed to look elsewhere for international profit. The wine market significantly benefited the economy of Algeria, helping to establish it as a stable economy. And the quote that I have here is from the Council of the Economy in Algeria during the time. Now, certainly, the situation is favorable. The vineyards of France are partly devastated. Algerian producers have a safe market outlet, and their products, even if of inferior quality, are sold at sufficiently remunerative prices.
Okay, so 6.5 Economic Imperialism, 1750 to 1900. So in this it says, sorry, that's kind of hard to read. The modern European-owned and managed sector of the economy centered on small industry and a highly developed export trade, designed to provide food and raw materials to France in return for capital and consumer goods. So we have a chart here of the Algerian population GDP and per capita GDP for the time period. And as you can see, it rises quite a bit. And this is because of their trade with France for exchanging raw materials for manufactured goods. And it says, British and French documents clearly indicate that both countries viewed Algeria in terms of the colony's economic potential. Indeed, a rivalry existed between the English and French over who would gain the commercial advantages. Both saw Algeria as a potential market for manufactured goods, as a source of grain, and as an entry point for the eventual commercial penetration of the African interior. So French ambitions in Africa in 1894. It is a notable fact that although the French as individuals have a reputation for greater prudence and economy than the English, they have as a nation shown far more liberty in expenditure on building up colonies for the benefit of future generations. During the 63-year occupation of Algeria, the mother country has already contributed 160 million, I'm sorry, I don't know the currency there, to the expenses of that colony, and still pays for the entire maintenance of an army and for much of the expenditure of public works. And then Yeah, and then at home, Charles X, sorry, recognized the strength of the growing opposition to his repressive regime. To divert attention from his domestic problems, Charles undertook to go beyond the unsuccessful blockade by invading Algeria. To save himself, the king sought a constituency in the army among Marseille merchants who favored the development of trade in the Mediterranean, and with textile merchants hoping to find new markets for their products. An Algerian colony appealed to these interests because it might place France better in a position to compete with the British, who then dominated Mediterranean trade. Equally important, some in the government considered the possibility of colonization sufficient reason to invade Algeria.
So basically, in these two sources, it is explaining that France had significant economic reason to colonize Algeria because it would give them a competitive edge in Mediterranean trade against the British, and they definitely invested quite a bit of money into establishing colonies in Algeria because it was very important to them.
And then 6.6 and 6.7, which is about migration to Algeria and from Algeria. Many Algerians migrated to France because they were trying to escape colonial life. However, they still weren't French citizens at the time. So their situation didn't change much, and they just needed to adapt to a new culture now. And French people migrated to Algeria to produce raw materials and sell back to France, including grapes, and many of them established large vineyards. Here's a primary source about the English from France, but it says, "We have destroyed the pirates of Algiers, who were less dangerous than she is. And everyone knows that the English used to furnish arms and ammunition to Abd el-Qadar and the Arabs against us." So the fact that there are pirates is proving that there are lots of ships and, I guess, contact between France and Algeria and the Mediterranean, so much so that it's profitable to have pirates to overtake these ships. And so I felt that proved migration. And also,
because there are so many ships, that would indicate that there are a lot of people moving back and forth.
There is lots of French-influenced architecture in Algeria, and this shows how French people transmitted their culture as they migrated to Algeria. So much so that Algerians used to call Europeans that were colonizing there pieds noirs to describe their black boots. 6.8, causation in the imperial age. So colonization and the creation of new nation states sparked intense uprisings and hostility in Algeria. It began with Abd el-Qadar.
I'm just going to pause the voice recording there. It began with Abd el-Qadar leading a guerrilla resistance to the Algerian, and it ended with the Algerian War of Independence from 1956 to 1962. The conflict didn't end there, but did grant them independence from the French. The desire for independence was based on religion and like a common culture that was being suppressed. And you can see that from here that says, "Long live Muslim Algeria" on this graffiti from the 1960s. And there is still a lot of conflict in the area. And here are our primary source, or not our primary sources, our works cited. Thank you for watching. Okay, bye-bye.